Hello, everyone. For the last time of 2025, even though I am definitely recording this on January 10th, after October has gone out but before November has gone out, my name is Crysis and I love movies. December was actually kind of weird just due to how much I had to play catch up when it comes to the movies that I had missed throughout the year, and I even ended up having to skip out on some just because I didn't have enough time. However, this month has the most movies by far, so be prepared for a long one. Enough of my blabbering, though, and let's get right into the reviews. Following Thanksgiving weekend on the 1st of the month was the first of only two screen unseens in December, where I saw Fackham Hall, and it was gut-bustingly hilarious. Tell me, what do you get when you mix the Naked Gun series and Downton Abbey? Apparently, Fackham Hall is what you get, and honestly, I don't think I would have wanted anything else from it. A comedy that mixes horrendous commentary that reflected how people thought in the 1930s, as well as an amusing murder mystery slash rom com. It is a great mixture of two things that realistically should not work that well together. That being said, the only reason it's not a perfect mixture of the two is that it could never really decide which side it wanted to go further with, the murder mystery portion or the romance portion. However, with a runtime of only 97 minutes, it made sense that they would have to rush some stuff to get to all the comedy, and as with the Naked Gun reboot earlier this year, my gut hurt due to all the laughing I was doing during the movie. It was a solid film all around with only minor grievances, so it'll get a 9 out of 10. The next day, I walked into an early access showing of 100 Nights of Hero, starring Emma Corrin and Micah Monroe. Although it should have been called 100 Minutes of Confusion because that's all I felt while watching this. The story made no sense, especially with the whole story within a story that was being told throughout the movie. I was struggling to keep my mind on the movie for almost the entire runtime, in part due to the story, but also in part due to the world in which the story was set. The logic behind everything was set in a prologue that only lasted for a minute and a half or so, and everything after that was just crude in a way that didn't sit well with me. The cast was also weirdly stacked for roles that showed up for exactly 30 seconds and then were never seen again. That being said, though, Emma Corrin did their best in their role as hero, which is to say that they were probably the best part of the movie, which really isn't saying much if I'm being honest. Maybe I just wasn't the target audience, but then again, I'm not entirely sure who the target audience would be for this. Unfortunately, it just didn't work for me, and Emma Corrin is really the only reason it'll be getting a 5.5 out of 10. Following that up, I caught a movie about grief called The Thing with Feathers, starring Benedict Cumberbatch. And maybe it's because I've gone through something similar to what is shown in the movie, and everyone grieves in their own way, but I just couldn't really connect to the emotions that were being sold by way of Benedict Cumberbatch's character. He did a great job at playing the despairing dad after his wife passes away, but I couldn't really buy the emotions that he was feeling. However, that might have had more to do with the way the story was being told, being relatively normal despite the obvious giant humanoid crow that follows the family up until the final quarter of the movie. And I do feel as though I'm being overly critical of a movie that I did overall enjoy. The kids in the movie did a great job. David Thewlis did a great job as the voice of the aforementioned crow creature thingy, and the story, minus the last 15 minutes or so, was very well told. Overall, it was a really good movie that shows how different people deal with loss, and it was well worth the 90 minutes of attention it needed, so it'll get an 8 out of 10. The next flick was one that I had been waiting for a hot minute. Five Nights at Freddy's 2, starring Josh Hutcherson, Piper Rubio, Elizabeth Lail, Matthew Lillard, and Skeet Ulrich. I mean, this was exactly what I expected when they said they were going to be making an adaptation of the game, so I can't really be mad about that. In that sense, it's pretty good, even as a standalone movie series. The whole thing was actually better than the first one, mostly because it felt like they were taking everything more seriously this time around. Sure, there were nods to the game with the mask, the locations, and a few other things that relate to spoilers, but it felt like a movie sequel first and a game adaptation second, and that just made it work really well. Everyone in the cast did great, from Josh Hutcherson to Piper Rubio, with Matthew Lillard being his perfect creepy self, at least in this series, and Skeet Ulrich bringing in some additional lore with his role. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually can't wait for the third one, and this one gets an 8 out of 10. Taking a few days off for travel, I checked into yet another early access showing, this time for No Other Choice, starring Lee Byung-hun. Before I get into the actual review, though, I have a question for you guys. What happens when you get so obsessed with your job that you can't imagine yourself doing anything else after getting fired from it? This movie, apparently, that's what. A strange, strange movie about a man who does everything in his power to get what he wants, up to and potentially even including murdering people. It was just such an odd story that I was more confused than anything else while watching it. Like, why didn't he just get a different job? One that either wasn't as competitive or as stressful as the last one. Story stuff aside, though, the acting was great from the whole cast, specifically Lee Byung-hun as Monsu, the main character. Being a movie set in Korea, the setting was gorgeous, obviously, and as weird as the story was, nothing felt off about how they got to where they did with the plot. It did drag on a bit, especially toward the end, but other than that, it was a solid movie, so it'll get a 7.5 from me. A couple days later, I went to a Broadway show in a movie theater by seeing Merrily We Roll Along, starring Jonathan Groff, Daniel Radcliffe, and Lindsay Mendez. Now, this movie is a strange one to review. First off, it's not really a movie per se, just a filmed stage production of a musical, almost like Hamilton was, so I'll be mostly judging it based on that. For the most part, I really enjoyed it. The music was fun and catchy, the acting was good, especially by stage musical standards, and the story was told in a very interesting way, though that's not usually a word I would use in a positive manner like this. It was interesting seeing how everything connected to itself and other things that happened throughout the story, though I won't say here how because of spoilers, even though this musical has been around since about 1981. Jonathan Groff, Daniel Radcliffe, and Lindsay Mendez all brought their all to the songs, and man, it was weird hearing Harry Potter go on this strange rant through songs. It was still all really well put together, and I'd love to see it on stage, though I doubt I'd get to see it with this cast. As there were a few things I would have liked to see differently, mostly from an editing perspective, it'll get a 9 out of 10. The next day, I checked into the latest reboot, this time about murder, around Christmas. Silent Night, Deadly Night, and it was goofy as shit the whole time, and I loved every second of it. The story was goofy, the acting was equally goofy, the characters were real fucking goofy, and it was all exactly what I wanted from this. Realistically, like quality-wise, it's not a good movie, but it is a great movie to just turn your brain off and enjoy a goofy, Christmas-themed slasher movie. It was weird, though, how almost every kill was just slightly off camera. It wasn't really graphic in a way that one would expect with a rating of, well, not, in any of the aspects a viewer might think of. Violence, gore, language, any kind of nudity, that kind of stuff. It was a relatively clean slasher movie, which is honestly kind of a letdown if I'm being honest, especially considering the nature of the original movies in this series. Overall, yes, I did like it, but it probably could have been a bit more, well, just a bit more, I guess. So it'll get a 6.5. After taking a few days off for some more travel, I started off a doubleheader with the second and final screen unseen of the month with Song Sung Blue, starring Huge Jacked Man and Kate Hudson. First off, respectfully, fuck this movie. It almost had me ugly crying in the theater because it brought up some memories and feelings that I've been dealing with and maybe mildly repressing for almost 4 years now. So there's that. Aside from those feelings, though, this was easily one of the better biopics this year. As with Springsteen back in October, this didn't shy away from the awful scenarios that kept falling on this family. From the accident shown in one of the trailers to a few things that are a bit more major and plot related, which I will leave out for spoiler reasons, obviously. Everything keeps going right and then going extremely wrong for this family, and it hurt to watch, but in a strangely good way. I would highly recommend this even if a musical biopic isn't necessarily your thing, and it'll get an 8.5 from me. The second half of this doubleheader is one that I almost wish I hadn't seen, but I'm okay with having seen it. Ella McCay. starring Emma Mackey, Jamie Lee Curtis, Woody Harrelson, Kumail Nanjiani, and Ayo Edebiri. Okay, so what is it with Oscar bait movies and unnecessarily stacked casts? You could tell this story without the last three people I mentioned when naming the cast, having cast them with lesser known actors, and the movie probably would have been, if not better, then at least slightly lower budget at the very least. That isn't to say that they weren't great, far from it, but having bigger name actors in such small roles was such a distraction whenever they were on screen. For the story side of things, it was okay. It was extremely rushed with so much happening over the course of just 3 days, and so much of it was either a misunderstanding or a case of jumping to conclusions based on the words of a singular person. It will be added to the list of movies where the more I think about them, the angrier I get, so I'm just going to stop thinking about it and say wait for it to go to streaming somewhere and put it on in the background, and it'll get a 5.5. Up next was a free movie, courtesy of a work party, and the last one that I saw before heading home for the holidays. Avatar, Fire and Ash. Have you ever had a movie that you legitimately regret watching? Not one where you're bored the whole time or has a bad story, bad acting, settings, etc., because at least those can still be a fun watch. Fire and Ash is not one of those movies, unless you are making fun of literally everything in the movie as you are watching it. The movie itself looks like someone took the renders from the Frontiers of Pandora video game from 23 and slapped it in Unreal Engine 4 for this movie, and I was so distracted by how bad the visuals looked that I missed out on whatever story there was. What little I did manage to catch just seemed like a retread of Way of Water, with a few things added here and there to make it new. Plus, as with Way of Water, it was just way too long. Hell, it could have had a runtime of 2 hours, and it still would have felt too long. It just wasn't worth it at all, and I can't really recommend this, even to fans of the first two movies. I really did want to like this movie, I did, but it just wasn't it, so it'll be getting a 3.5. Now, you might have noticed at this point that we've only gotten through 11 movies. We are about 12.5 minutes into the video, and I said that I had gone home for the holidays, meaning I wouldn't be able to watch many more movies, right? Wrong. After arriving home and getting done with some other obligations that weekend, I ended up watching a total of 31 movies in 10 days, with only 4 of those seen in theaters. So, without any further ado, let's get started with this insane stretch of movies. The first one was Borderline, starring Samara Weaving, and this is just such a strange movie to experience. On the one hand, the whole cast does a great job showing the absurdity of the situation. The action, if you can call it that, is very well done, and the story, strange though it may be, is actually kind of entertaining. On the other hand, Samara Weaving's accent slips between her natural one and some strange American amalgam throughout her lines. The action is also very tame and sporadic, and the story takes so many twists and turns throughout the 94-minute runtime with so many strange scenes that it's hard to take it seriously at all. It was an entertaining watch, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely one of those movies you put on in the background when you have nothing else to do, so it'll get a 5.5 out of 10. Up next, I hit up the theater and ended up in an auditorium full of children to see the SpongeBob movie, The Search for SquarePants, starring Tom Kenny, Clancy Brown, and Mark Hamill. Now, is this movie entirely dumb shit? Yes. However, that's mostly what newer SpongeBob content has been, so I'm okay with that, I think. As an adult who grew up with SpongeBob and being roughly 9 months older than the series as a whole, seeing this version of it is strange. It was still relatively good, don't get me wrong, but it was definitely more of a wait for streaming movie than anything else. In a way, I would compare it to Elio from earlier this year. Cute, but nothing groundbreaking or really special in comparison to other movies from the same studio or franchise. It had a good message, but other than that, it was pretty forgettable overall, so it'll get a 7 out of 10, though that might mostly be the nostalgia talking. Following that up was an untold story from World War II, The World Will Tremble. as with any movie set during the main turmoil of World War II, this movie hurt to watch. This one especially because of how closely it followed the actual events that it portrayed. Mostly set at the Kelmo death camp in Poland, it showed a good amount of aspects of that time that aren't shown in a lot of other movies, especially the heartbreak that these prisoners had to endure. Everyone in the movie did a fantastic job at showing the horrors they had to endure at these camps. And it was just such a simple movie too, with hardly any action or unnecessary scenes. It was a tough watch, but one that I'm glad I saw, and it will get a 10 out of 10. The day after that, I hit up the theater again to watch a new book adaptation in The Housemaid, starring Sydney Sweeney, Amanda Seyfried, and Brandon Sklenar. And for just the third time this year, I wish this had been turned into a TV show instead of a 2-hour movie. There was just too much to get through and not enough time to really care about any of the characters that were on screen. Of the 3 main characters, they all acted their asses off, don't get me wrong, but it felt like Sydney Sweeney just played her character the same way she has in the few projects I've seen her in this year. It was still good, especially toward the end of the movie, but it felt like she phoned it in from time to time. Other than that, though, the story was really good, if a bit rushed, but again, I think this would have been better as a TV show. Seeing as how it did what it needed to, I can't really fault it for that, so it'll get a 7.5 from me. The next few were all either on my laptop or the TV, starting with Tim Travers and the Time Travel Paradox on Tubi, and it was... Well, I honestly don't know how to react to this one. It was such a goofy concept, but it was executed fairly decently. It took everything that worked about sci-fi comedies and turned it up to about a 9 on the weirdness scale. From multiples of the same character, totaling 30 different versions of Tim Travers at one point, to a, and I wish I was joking about this, Titanic reference from an orgy with most of the Tims, it was just all kinds of weird. The acting was so-so the whole time, from an oddly stacked cast that outside of the main character included Felicia Day, Joel McHale, and Danny Trejo. What the hell? It was just overall a very strange movie, and one that I'm okay having waited on, and with everything in mind, it'll get 6 Tims out of 10. Following that, with a Christmas Day doubleheader, was The Grove, and I cannot tell you what this movie wanted to do or be. It wanted to be a movie full of relationship drama and stuff like that, but it also wanted to be a monster thriller / horror movie that took way too long to get to any kind of spooky stuff or action. And even when it did, it was set at night in a forest with absolutely piss-poor lighting that made it almost impossible to see any of the deaths that are expected with this kind of story. The whole of the movie happened because of a shitty friend, which is the whole crux of everything that goes wrong in the movie, including a literal Chekhov's gun that didn't get used properly at all. None of it really worked for me, which is kind of a shame because this movie seemed like it at least had potential, so it'll get 4.5. The second movie of that Christmas doubleheader was St. Clare, starring Bella Thorne and Ryan Phillip. So you're telling me that we have a good mystery, Bella Thorne back to acting in a good project, and an overall good movie? What more could you ask for? Well, other actors who cared about their roles maybe, but other than that, I think this movie worked out really well. It didn't have any messy relationship drama, any random bullshit that would drag down the story, anything like that. Instead, it was a very clean and easy 1.5-hour movie that got in, set up its characters and story, and got out. Are there plot holes? Sure, but what movie nowadays doesn't have any? Regardless, I think this was a movie that did exactly what it set out to do without any preachy message about something completely unrelated to the story. Overall, it was a really good movie, and one that I'd probably watch again if I had nothing else going on, and it'll get a 7.5. The next day, I sat down and watched A Little Prayer, and it could have had a little less drama. You know, for a movie that was only an 1.5 hours, it felt like so much longer than that. There were no fewer than 7 different conflicts going on at one point in this movie, and it made me not care about any of them. Call me a shitty person if that's the case, but there was just too much happening all at the same time, but also I don't know when anything is happening. There's no definitive passing of time between events, so it could have been the next day, the next week, the next month. I have no idea. Plus, okay, I know that he is meant to be a sweet old man, but the dad character just pissed me off with how much he was butting into the lives of those around him. It's meant to be seen in a way that he's protective and wants to have a happy life for him and his, but it's just overbearing and I couldn't connect with it at all. It just wasn't good, and it'll get a 3 out of 10 as a result. The next day was yet another doubleheader, the first movie of which was The Cut, starring Orlando Bloom and John Turturro. This is another weird one because I can understand the main character's drive and desire to win, but also he starts listening to a dude he's known for a few hours over the people that have literally been in his corner for his entire career. Like, the two main actors do great in Bloom and Turturro at showing the drive and kind-hearted maliciousness to getting Bloom to the requisite weight for the fight, but it's just overall a bit of a nothing burger of a movie. It was decent, but it's better as a throw it on in the background kind of flick than anything else, so it'll get a 5 out of 10. Following that up was a quaint little movie called Pools, starring Odessa Zion and Mason Gooding. Honestly, I didn't quite know what to expect when I started this, but after having watched it, I'm glad I did. It showed the mania that comes from doing something you're not supposed to, drinking and some minor B&E to get into people's pools, followed by the sober conversations that happen after the drinks have elapsed. It's been a while since I've bought every actor in their role for a movie, and this one surprised me because I never saw the characters as their actors. Sure, I recognize some of them, namely Odessa Zion, unfortunately from Until Dawn, though she has been in other things this year, strangely enough. Ariel Winter from Modern Family, and Mason Gooding from Scream and other projects, but I only ever saw them as their characters. The story was your standard last-ditch effort to have some fun story, but it was told in a really heartfelt way that I was fully behind by the end of it. If given the chance, I would definitely see it again, and it's getting an 8 out of 10. The next day was just filled to the brim with movies, starting with the latest Bible story in David from Angel Studios. And I think the main thing I enjoyed about this movie was the telling of a Bible story that isn't normally told. In fact, I think the only other version of this is the VeggieTales version, and that's 29 years old at this point. For the movie itself, the music was okay, enough to get my feet bopping along, but nothing really memorable at any point. The animation was fine, if a bit strange at points, but other than that, it was yet another Angel Studios good but not great movies. It got in, told its story in as kid-friendly a way as you can with this violent of a Bible story, and got out. It was still surprisingly dark for a kid's movie, but yeah, it was decent, so it'll get a 7.5. Later that day, I watched Traumatika and sincerely wish I hadn't. Maybe I'm just desensitized to normal horror movie stuff, but this just wasn't scary. And the stuff that disgusted me the most wasn't even the horror bits. It was some stuff that happened in the story that is, unfortunately, necessary to the plot, so it will go undiscussed here, but just know that it's not worth watching at all. Everything from the acting to the story to the scares, everything is just plain bad, and it really just pissed me off. It would have been my first DNF of the year, or ever really, if I didn't have such a morbid curiosity as to where the story would go next. It's not good, and I honestly wish I had saved the 82 minutes watching this and watched something better instead. It's getting a 1, and I am moving past it. Following that up, though, was a significantly better movie in Looking Through Water, starring Michael Douglas, Walker Scobell, and Michael Stahl David. Now, a story told within a story is very tricky to do right, and this movie does it in a way that makes sense, almost like The Princess Bride. The story itself is decent, your standard grandpa has a chat with a grandkid that got in trouble kind of story, but it's told in a way that just works, though I can't really tell you why. For what little they're actually in the movie, Michael Douglas and Walker Scobell do fantastic, and the guy that they cast to be a younger Michael Douglas, Michael Stahl David, looks damn near spot on, so props to the casting director for the spot there. Is it a mildly forgettable story once you're done with it? Sure, but it's a great story while you're in it, and I would give it a watch again if I had the time and $7 more to rent it again, or 15 to just straight up buy it, and it'll get a 9.5 out of 10. The final movie of that night was one that had me absolutely stressing because of the stupid decisions from the main character. American Sweatshop, starring Lily Reinhart. There's been a few movies in the past where I've said, damn, I'm glad I do not work that job. And this is one of those movies and jobs. Video content moderators really need a raise. Holy shit. For the actual movie itself, it feels like a natural progression of actions taken by the main character, if slightly exaggerated for the sake of drama and tension. The story is predicated on one very specific example in a laundry list of messed up videos these moderators have to watch, so it's strange that this is the straw that broke the camel's back for the main character. But whatever, movie has to movie. Lily Reinhart did a great job showing all of the emotions that come with the job, as well as showing how it affected her life outside of said job. I don't think I would watch it again because 1, it was a pretty tough watch due to the content, and 2, I would just be screaming at Daisy to not do the weird shit she's doing to try and fix things. With everything taken into consideration, it's going to get an 8.5. The following day started my quest to get caught up on streaming features I had missed throughout the year, which started with The Gorge on Apple TV, starring Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy. Honestly, while this was a fantastic movie, it was yet another example of being too many genres at once. It was a sci-fi movie, an action movie, a romance, a mystery thriller, and a horror movie, all crammed into one 2-hour package. That being said, though, it did do pretty good with each of those genres, save for the romance bit, as that felt more like an afterthought than anything else. Anya Taylor-Joy and Miles Teller do a fantastic job playing off one another, especially for the first, half of the movie when they don't actually talk to each other. And I would love to know what the script looked like for that part. I'd love to watch it again just to see what I missed the first time, and it'll get 8.5 spooky gorges out of 10. Immediately following that up was another Apple movie called Echo Valley, starring Julianne Moore, Sydney Sweeney, and Domhnall Gleeson. Now, this is the first Apple TV project I think that's just solidly okay. Not fantastic, not terrible, just okay. Julianne Moore does her best to bring some life to the movie, but mostly drab performances from everyone else, whether that's Sydney Sweeney, Edmund Donovan, or Domhnall Gleeson, ended up dragging it back down to just mid-status. The story itself is just a constant comedy of errors, starting off with one wholesome choice that leads to one bad choice after another, after another, after another, and it just didn't end until the credits rolled with an ending that was way too clean for the mess that it had created up to that point. It was just overall a very meh experience, but one that I'm still mildly glad that I watched, and it's getting a 5.5 out of 10. After that, I got out of the house to watch a 2.5-hour movie about ping pong, catching the last theatrical release of the year in Marty Supreme, starring Timothée Chalamet and Odessa Azion, among others. Now, I don't know if this was written, directed, or edited by someone with a severe case of ADHD when they weren't taking any medicine for it, but it was just like one battle after another. Overly long, overly complicated, and overly loud, with scenes that never got to breathe. What starts off as a simple misunderstanding leads to a whole boatload of tomfuckery that does not end until the credits roll in a story that ends way too happy and clean for the mess that had been told for the past 2.5 hours. It was also another case of the movie having zero likable characters, aside from Odessa Azion maybe, but even then, she was still kind of a shit person. Nothing flowed at all, the story was a mess at best and incomprehensible at worst, and it was just overall not a great experience. Hell, I wouldn't even recommend putting this on in the background due to how complicated everything gets toward the end, and it's getting a 2.5 because of that. Well, not solely because of that, but more an accumulation of everything. Later that night, I sat down and stressed myself the hell out by watching The Lost Bus, starring Matthew McConaughey and America Ferrera. Holy stress headache, Batman. The Lost Bus, based on the events that happened in Paradise, California in 2018, is one of the most stressful movies I have seen this year, even compared to things like Warfare and Bring Her Back. Matthew McConaughey and America Ferrera do a fantastic job at showing the emotions, both good and bad, that come with the situation that they are put in. And the kids that are on the bus with McConaughey and Ferrera were fantastic at showing the fear that would realistically affect elementary schoolers in that situation. If there's two things that will always emotionally affect me in a movie, it's scared kids and tough characters who break down, and this had both of them in spades, and it hit all the right buttons to be a fantastic movie. I sincerely hope all the kids on the bus in real life got the therapy they needed, and this movie gets an extremely rare 12 out of 10. Following Peak was bad, in the form of The Old Guard 2, starring Charlize Theron and Uma Thurman. As with In the Lost Lands from earlier this year, how am I supposed to care about what goes on in a movie when none of the actors look like they want to be there? Like, no one had any kind of expression that gave the impression like they wanted to be in the movie. No one had any kind of excitement that would show any kind of incitement to action, and it was just overall very boring and had me ignoring what was going on. The story itself is half of a two-part story that realistically won't get made due to this one performing so poorly, unless the actors are already locked into a 3-movie contract for this series. The fight choreography was lackluster, the set design was lacking, and there's really no stakes in a movie where everyone is immortal. I'll probably watch the third one if/when it releases, but only to not leave the story unfinished, not unlike the new Strangers trilogy. This one is getting a 3.5 out of 10, and hopefully the finale has more gusto than this one. The final movie of that night was one called Vicious, starring Dakota Fanning, and this movie tacks on an extra 20 minutes of runtime when it really didn't need to. And maybe that's just me being a pessimistic asshole and getting sick of the happy endings that American horror movies have, but it didn't feel like it had earned the ending it got. On the acting side of things, Dakota Fanning did a great job in the role of the protagonist, showing the terror and pain, both physical and emotional, that she goes through during the course of this holiday night. For those that are faint of heart, about 60% of this movie will be enough to put you in the ER for the day or night, so maybe skip this one. But for horror fans, I would recommend this one for a wintry watch or a spooky season closer, and it'll get a 7.5 from me. The next day started off with Fountain of Youth from Apple TV, starring John Krasinski, Natalie Portman, Isa Gonzalez, and Domhnall Gleeson, and I guess I have to correct my Echo Valley review, as this one was also extremely mid. From the acting to the story to the twists, it was just okay. On the acting front, John Krasinski and Natalie Portman played siblings with relative sincerity, but it was just missing something special that would have made it truly believable. The story was your bog standard looking for something mysterious storyline that had everything that you would expect it to, which made it really predictable. The twists were also predictable as hell because of the actors chosen for the specific roles they play in the story and who they have played in the past. It was enjoyable, sure, but in a heavy-handed, turn your brain off and don't think about it kind of way, and it'll get a 6 out of 10 for its efforts. Immediately following that up was The Thursday Murder Club from Netflix, and I have to say I love it when movies just decide to say fuck it and cast every old yet still insanely active actor under the sun for the main characters and even side characters, because what the fuck do you mean we have Pierce Brosnan, Helen Mirren, Ben Kingsley, Jonathan Pryce, Richard E. Grant, along with Tom Ellis, David Tennant, and Naomi Ackie, all of whom are having an absolute blast in their roles. The story actually had some aspects that surprised me, which is new considering how many I've seen by this point. It did feel like it dragged on for a bit long at points and had some scenes that were ultimately unnecessary or repetitive, but other than that, it was a fantastic movie, earning it an 8.5 out of 10. Up next was a House of Dynamite on Netflix, and for the first time ever, 243 movies into the year, holy shit, I have to break my no spoiler rule for a bit. This is the first movie in almost 9 months that made me go, that's the fucking ending? Fuck you. I just, this whole movie is just 2 hours that tells the same 40-minute story detailing the same 19 minutes 3 times, and it didn't need to be told this way. There was very little told differently in the 3 chapters, and it just pissed me off the whole time. The acting was fine, I guess, but it was never engaging enough for me to actually care. There was also the case of having too many faces that were recognizable, but I couldn't quite place where, so I spent more time looking up characters than paying attention to the movie itself. It was just too much and not enough at the same time, and I wish I had saved the 2 hours I spent watching this to watch something else, earning it a 2.5 out of 10. Grabbing a quick bite to eat, I next checked out G20, and this movie pissed me off. Not because of the ending, although that did confuse me when it happened, but because of every aspect of the story before the ending. I won't say why here because of spoilers, even though this movie has been out since April 10th, I think, but it was just so dumb. Every single decision made was just stupid, from both the protagonist and the villains. Viola Davis and Antony Starr, playing the protagonist and antagonist respectively, tried to save the movie with their acting, but their talents were wasted on this script. It was a fun-ish watch, I guess, but the experience was still marred by the story throughout the movie, especially the ending that is way too happy given the context of the rest of the movie. I would recommend skipping this and only watching it if there were literally nothing else to watch, and it gets a 3.5 for its efforts. Immediately following that up was Heads of State, starring Idris Elba and John Cena, and I gotta say, seeing those two team up was not something I knew I wanted, especially when these two actors, renowned for their roles in action movies, play characters who are not prepared for the situation they find themselves in, on the run from those trying to kill them. The story was kind of standard, your basic on the run, finding help wherever they can kind of thing, but it still worked, and that was mostly due to the chemistry between Elba and Cena. There were a few odd contrivances that happened mostly for the movie, but it was still an entertaining ride from start to finish, even the more serious moments, and yeah, I would probably see it again if I needed a good action flick, and it'll get 7 fish and chips out of 10. Ending that night, I saw The Pickup, starring Eddie Murphy, Pete Davidson, and Keke Palmer. And I had a lot more fun watching this movie than I thought I would. The comedy duo of Murphy and Davidson was a matchup I never thought would work, but they were able to play off each other so well, and I was laughing for the majority of the movie. The action was a bit subpar, but it's more of a comedy than an action movie, especially when it comes to how limited the sets were for 80% of the action in the movie being the armored truck. The reasoning for the antagonist makes sense, and it was refreshing to hear something that was realistic enough to make sense, but also make you question their reasoning at the end of the day. You're still a mild piece of shit criminal, but I get it. If you need a fun watch at the end of a rough day, The Pickup is the movie for you, and it'll get another 7 out of 10 for its efforts. The next morning, I missed my alarm, but was still able to catch Under Fire on Hulu, starring Mason Gooding and Dylan Sprouse. And, okay, holy shit, the brotherly chemistry between Mason Gooding and Dylan Sprouse needs to be studied in a lab somewhere, because this is the second movie they've made in as many years where they play off each other so well, but I have never seen them in anything together before those two movies. That's not to say that they're good or bad movies necessarily, with this one in particular being your standard pinned down action movie, but the way that Gooding and Sprouse play off each other and build up tension is amazing. The visual effects could have used some work, but I imagine this movie was shot in a few days at most with a mildly limited budget, so I'll cut them some slack there. It was honestly a really fun movie, and another movie that I'll add to my turn your brain off flicks, and it'll get a 6.5 for its efforts. Following that one up was Eenie Meanie, starring Samara Weaving, and it was yet another movie of all time. Another movie where I enjoyed it a bit more than I thought I would. Eenie Meanie felt like an original story, which is a shocker for an age where there are so many sequels, reboots, and adaptations. Samara Weaving does great in the lead role, and she mostly gets to have the screen time all to herself, with no other major stars showing up and distracting the viewer throughout the runtime, save for Beast Mode showing up. That will never not shock me out of a movie, if I'm being honest. The supporting cast all did serviceable jobs, with some going more over the top than I think is necessary in a movie like this. Overall, it was a decent movie that told the story and got out, and more movies should strive to do that. Unfortunately, it was only slightly better than just okay, so it'll get a 6.5 out of 10. Up next was one I was going to see in theaters but was taken out of the rotation in the one theater it was supposed to be at, The Ice Tower. Although, I'm kind of glad I missed it. I mean, it was a movie that was confusing at best and just plain bad at worst. I don't know if I'm not the intended audience for this movie, and that could be because I'm not French, but I just don't know who this would be intended for outside of snobby film pricks. The story just kind of meanders through itself, taking pauses here and there to show us a film being made inside of the film we're watching, but nothing ever really comes of anything, save for some weird omniscient knowledge being dropped by the main antagonist toward the end of the movie. It was acted well enough, I guess, but nothing really stuck with me past the end of the movie. It was just very strange, and definitely not in a good way, earning it a 4 stolen costume crystals out of 10. The penultimate movie of the year turned out to be Mountainhead on HBO Max, and it is very much a nothing burger of a movie, and I legitimately regret the time I spent watching it. While the acting was pretty much fine from everyone in the movie, from Steve Carell and Corey Michael Smith to Jason Schwartzman and Rami Youssef, everything just happened way too fast and on such an accelerated time frame. It's like doomsday planners saw that AI videos were being a thing and jumped on the worst possible outcome. 4 tech bros planning a global takeover with themselves at the helm. It was just such a bullshit movie with a bunch of random shit thrown in for no reason, and the more I think about it, the more it's pissing me off. Add it to the list. So I'm just going to give it a thumbs down, say do not watch it, and move on, giving it 3 tech douches, I mean bros, out of 10 in the process. Finally, after all was said and done, I watched the goofiest movie I have seen since Silent Night, Deadly Night, The Death of Snow White. Now, okay, tell me something, and it's rhetorical because this is a YouTube video and I know that, but like, why does a dumb fuck action horror version of Snow White look better in its costume and set design than the Disney Bucks produced version that was released back in March? The settings looked cleaner despite being in a natural forest, I think, and the costumes looked 10 times better than the Party City shit in the Disney movie. Comparisons aside, though, this movie shined in its adaptation of the source material, including a little joke about the Brothers Grimm, as well as its set and costume design. The special effects could have used some work, and the gore seemed a bit excessive, but what are you going to expect from a budget that's not sponsored by everyone's favorite mouse overlord? Is it a good movie? No. Absolutely not. Is it entertaining, though? Abso-fucking-lutely yes, and it's something that I would put on again just to laugh at the absurdity of it all, and it'll get a 6.5 dwarves out of 10 for its effort. In the month of December, I saw a total of 41 movies for an average rating of 6.4. I walked into only 2 of those movies as screen unseens, those being Fackham Hall and Song Sung Blue. I still ended up managing to save $112.35 on tickets, with a grand total of $54.48 being spent, just under half the total saved. I have no clue how that happened, but I'm okay with it. A-List is still amazing, and no, unfortunately, I am still not sponsored. As another strange stat for y'all, I only ended up seeing 14 of those movies in theaters, with the other 27 being on streaming. As a brief recap, okay, brief being the wrong word, of everything that I saw this month, we had The Lost Bus alone at 12, The World Will Tremble at 10, Looking Through Water at 9.5, Fackham Hall and Merrily We Roll Along tied at 9, a 4-way tie between Song Sung Blue, The Gorge, The Thursday Murder Club, and American Sweatshop at 8.5, a 3-way tie between The Thing with Feathers, Five Nights at Freddy's 2, and Pools at 8, a 5-way tie at 7.5 between No Other Choice, The Housemaid, St. Clair, David, and Vicious, another 3-way tie between the SpongeBob movie, The Search for SquarePants, Heads of State, and The Pickup at 7, Silent Night, Deadly Night, Under Fire, Eenie Meanie, and The Death of Snow White all tied at 6.5. Tim Travers and the Time Travel Paradox and Fountain of Youth tied at 6. Another four-way tie between 100 Nights of Hero, Ella McCay, Borderline, and Echo Valley at 5.5, The Cut at 5, The Grove at 4.5, and The Ice Tower at 4. Avatar, Fire and Ash, The Old Guard 2, and G20 all tied at 3.5. A Little Prayer and Mountainhead tied at 3. Marty Supreme and A House of Dynamite both tied at 2.5. And last, and certainly least for the month of December, we had Traumatika at a 1. Holy shit, remind me to never do this shit again, please. A grand total of 114 pages of scripts, 365 days, and 251 movies later, the 2025 season of movies has come to a close. And don't think this is the end for me either. I'm going to try and get a script going for a video in between this one and January's video, one that contains all the weird and random stats that I've been compiling throughout the year. We'll see how long that one takes though, and that might be less of a shitpost than these ones are. We'll see though. God, 251. And I was concerned with getting to 100 by the end of the year. Holy shit. Hopefully January and February are more of a break from me, but we'll just have to see. Until then though, thank you all for watching, and I hope that you take me up on at least some of these recommendations and see what I saw. Until the next one though, happy viewing and Happy New Year.